A dry wind swept across the test range, lifting dust over the rows of branded tents and aluminum benches. Contractors in polished boots moved like they belonged, their rifles, gleaming cases rolling smoothly behind them. And then there was her, walking alone with a wooden crate that looked like it had survived a decade in someone's attic. No one stopped her. A few glanced, most ignored. A technician near the check-in station nudged his buddy and nodded toward her boots, muttering something about logistics, misrouting another civilian. She didn't speak. She just handed over a folded document, waited for the man behind the table to skim it, and walked when he pointed her toward lane 12. There was no handler walking behind her, no company badge swinging from her neck. At her lane, the space was quiet. Next to her, a rep from a major contractor adjusted a digital scope, while two assistants arranged ammo trays by weight class. She opened her crate without ceremony. Inside were 3 silver rounds, each one placed in its own hand-cut groove. The rifle wasn't much. No thermal case, no smart barrel. It sat bare on the bench, bolt action, old, almost stubborn in its lack of ambition. One by one, others noticed. Someone called out from the next tent, "Nice antique." Another voice added something about cosplay. The laughter wasn't cruel exactly. It was careless, the kind that assumes you don't matter. She didn't respond. She didn't even blink. She sat down, waited for her time slot, and watched the flag above her lane turn green. There was no announcement, no crowd. She stood, lifted the rifle, and loaded one round with quiet precision. No scope adjustment, no check for wind. She pressed her cheek to the stock and fired. The sound cracked clean across the sand. No tracer, no screen flash. No one even looked up. A few seconds later, she walked back to her bench and sat down again. By nightfall, a data analyst 3 buildings away would freeze in front of a monitor, staring at a graph that shouldn't exist. A grouping too tight. A thermal load too stable. Someone would ask who fired it, and they'd realize they never even saw her face. Section 1. Her name was Evelyn Ford. Evelyn Ford didn't carry much with her. A canvas coat that had faded at the seams, boots she'd resoled herself twice, and a crate that had once been a toolbox before she lined it with foam. She moved with a kind of quiet that made people look away before they realized why they noticed her. She was 38 and had spent half her life working in labs with names she could never mention in public. Her specialty had been casing behavior under variable heat loads, a niche so precise it made most people's eyes glaze over. But inside that focus, she had found elegance. Evelyn didn't talk about why she left. Some guessed burnout. Others assumed politics. The truth was simpler and harder. She had watched a team doctor results to meet a contract deadline, and no one stopped them. She had filed a report. It was buried. After that, she finished her term and disappeared. She didn't argue. She didn't make a scene. She just stopped answering invitations and stopped taking calls. For the next 6 years, she lived in a 1-bedroom home outside Santa Fe, a place where the air was dry enough to preserve the graphite she used to sketch projectile paths by hand. She kept a workshop in the back filled with scrap and solder and notebooks she never shared. Evelyn never worked with investors again. She didn't pitch or network or apply for funding. She saved what she could, bought raw alloy in small batches, and tested prototypes in the canyons where no one would hear the shots. It took her 5 years to get the round right. Her goal wasn't to break records. She didn't care about naming rights or legacy. What she wanted was a round that did exactly what it was supposed to do, regardless of temperature pressure or how long it had been waiting in a magazine. She named the model S19 in her notebooks, not after anything personal, just because it was the 19th one that worked. The casing was built from a hybrid alloy with a cooling curve she designed from scratch. It wasn't beautiful, but it was honest. That's what mattered to her. Not polish, not specs that looked good in brochures. She wanted something functional in chaos, something real. When the open test call came out that year, she almost ignored it. But something about the language in the listing caught her eye. It invited unauthorized submissions from independent engineers for a live range evaluation. For once, the door wasn't locked. She mailed her packet in with no cover letter, just a signature and the technical breakdown. When no one responded for weeks, she assumed it had been thrown out. Then a manila envelope arrived with a lane assignment and a single-page waiver. She packed her crate. On the morning of the test, she didn't bring any backup gear. No banners, no slideshows. Just the crate, a hand-folded graph, and the 3 rounds she trusted most. Evelyn never told anyone why she showed up that day. Not afterward. Not even when her shot became the most analyzed ballistic event in the program's recent history. Maybe it wasn't about proving anything. Maybe she just wanted to know if something pure could still land straight. Section 2, Setting the Stage, The Environment of Power. Subpart 1, The Range of Giants. The range stretched wide under a flat sky edged with tents that shimmered in the morning heat. Each tent bore the name of a company worth more than most cities, draped in sharp logos and strung with fiber lights and high-end tech. Polished displays stood under cooled canopies, while assistants checked optics and triple-confirmed launch timings. Vendors moved with practiced ease, their uniforms crisp, their smiles tight. Someone adjusted a rifle with a carbon steel finish while a marketing rep filmed a walkthrough for investors watching live from a boardroom 2 states away. Every corner hummed with power, not the kind that came from machines, but from confidence thick in the air. Beyond the commotion, rows of benches gleamed with fresh paint flanked by gear cases that clicked open with soft mechanical grace. One company had brought a folding wall of digital overlays looping their groupings on giant screens like victory laps. Another offered chilled drinks to spectators while a drone circled above streaming footage for a private contractor review. No one noticed the woman who entered through the side checkpoint carrying a wooden crate with both hands. She wore a canvas coat creased at the elbows and boots dulled by sun. Her stride was quiet, steady, out of rhythm with the show unfolding around her. Technicians passed her without pause, brushing past with loaded carts and nervous glances at their checklists. She didn't look lost, but the absence of logos on her coat made her easy to overlook. A handler glanced at her briefly, then turned to joke with someone about an intern misplacing credentials. Near the staging tent, a contractor zipped up his tactical vest while 2 assistants polished the casing edges on a set of smart rounds. Another vendor leaned over his assistant's shoulder, correcting the placement of a promotional badge before a photographer stepped in for the shot. Evelyn walked past all of it. The contrast wasn't loud. It didn't demand attention, but it lingered in the corners of every frame, in the way she carried her crate, while others rolled theirs, in the silence behind her footsteps and the lack of anyone trailing beside her. As she approached her assigned lane, a gust of wind blew a streak of dust across the painted range markings. Someone behind her laughed and pointed toward the bench she had chosen, a place left empty because it held nothing worth showing off. She lowered the crate without hesitation, her eyes scanning the line, not to compete but to measure. Around her, voices rose in practiced pitches. Presentations began. Data feeds lit up with overlays. Evelyn unlatched her crate. No one turned. No one asked who she was. And for a moment that invisibility felt like its own kind of armor. Subpart 2. Her silent arrival. Evelyn reached the check-in table just as a pair of reps from a tech firm were walking away, laughing about the size of their trailer. The man behind the clipboard didn't look up at first. When he did, his eyes flicked from her crate to her boots, then back down to the list in his hand. He asked for vendor ID without much interest. She handed over a folded document, the corners soft from time. He unfolded it slowly, then frowned at the line that marked her entry as independent. For a moment he hesitated, like he might ask a question. Then he shrugged and pointed to lane 12. His voice was flat, as if she were background noise, and his tone didn't bother to hide how little he expected from her. Evelyn nodded once and walked. Around her, conversation rose in tight clusters. Someone behind a camera setup snorted and nudged his colleague. They were looking at her crate, at the scuffs along the handle and the way it didn't roll like the rest. The jokes came in low voices. One called it vintage. Another said it looked like firewood. None of it reached her face. She just kept moving, her pace steady, her breath even. When she arrived at her assigned bench, it stood bare. No glossy tray, no digital monitor, just a metal surface warmed by the sun. She lifted the crate onto it and opened the lid with care. Inside were 3 rounds, silver smooth and tucked into foam. They had no labels, no marketing polish, no hint of being part of something larger. They looked handmade because they were. Vendors on either side glanced over. A few smirked. One muttered something about hobby gear and how even interns brought better loadouts. Evelyn didn't react. She arranged the rounds on the tray with practiced ease. She didn't recalibrate. She didn't take notes. She didn't measure wind or angle or distance. Her prep was quiet and short, like she already knew what to expect. As others powered up tablets and dialed in overlays, she sat on the bench and waited. Her hands rested on her lap. The clipboard marking her entry was still tucked under her arm. No one asked where she was from. No one asked what she'd brought. And in that absence, a space opened around her. One where assumptions grew louder than questions. One where silence started to speak. Section 3. Conflict, dismissed before proven. Subpart 1. Mockery and dismissal. The sun had risen higher by the time Evelyn's name reached the rotation list. Around her, the noise never stopped. Technicians barked instructions, reps explained specs into cameras, and voices carried across the range like static that never settled. Someone from 2 benches down pointed at her setup and asked if she was testing museum pieces. Another joked about her using luck instead of calibration. A few laughed. The kind of laughter that doesn't come from humor but from comfort in knowing you're not the target. She sat still watching the flag above her lane. It hadn't turned green yet. Her hands didn't move. The rounds were already laid out untouched since she placed them. Behind her, someone whispered loud enough to be heard. Said something about how every year brought a wild card. Another said she probably forgot what caliber meant. None of it mattered. She didn't even blink. When the loudspeaker cracked, it stumbled on her name. The announcer misread it, clipped it short, and didn't correct himself. A few people laughed again. Then her lane number was called. She stood up without comment. The rifle was already on the bench, resting with no adornments, no digital display, no heatsink module, just steel, wood, and trust. She lifted it with both hands. No one offered to assist. No one paused their work. No one even turned to watch. As she stepped into position, the field around her seemed to hush, but not because of her. It was the usual pause before a round fired, the way people waited for their own data to come up. Her test was just background. The range officer glanced at her once, then looked away. No confirmation needed, no timer reset, just a nod. The rifle settled into her shoulder. She breathed once. She loaded a single round, closed the bolt, and fired. The shot cracked clean. No trail, no flash, no response. Not a single person clapped. No screen lit up with results. The platform didn't announce her grouping. She stepped back, let the rifle rest, and sat again. A tech walked past and glanced at her casing as it rolled to a stop. He picked it up, gave it a quick look, and tossed it into a bin labeled spent. Then he moved on. The sound of conversation rose again. Somewhere a company was preparing a full demonstration. Evelyn didn't look over. She didn't touch the remaining rounds. She just waited, not for applause, but for the silence to settle again. Subpart 2, ignored and erased. The casing rolled to the edge of the bench and came to rest near the corner lip. A technician glanced at it, picked it up between 2 fingers, and dropped it into a dented metal bin without reading the mark at its base. It landed with a hollow clink among dozens of others, indistinguishable now, from rounds that had failed or misfired. The monitor beside Evelyn's lane remained blank. No feed was triggered. No data flashed across the screen. Someone tapped the console twice, then moved on to prepare for the next vendor. A clipboard that once held her sign-in sheet was shuffled to the bottom of a stack. A red stamp marked her entry void. The ink was still damp when a junior admin clipped it behind a larger packet for a defense firm scheduled to arrive next hour. No one noticed the form was still warm from where she had held it. Around her, the rhythm of the range returned to full speed. Assistants swept benches. Drones recalibrated above the field. Vendors shook hands and ran final checks before their time slots. Evelyn's presence dissolved into routine. She sat for another minute, long enough to feel the shift, to recognize that she had become invisible again. Then she reached into her coat and pulled out a folded graph. It was creased at the edges, lined in pencil with arcs marked in shorthand symbols. She knelt beside the bench, pressed the graph flat against the underside, and smoothed a piece of tape across the top edge. It held. She checked one corner. Then she stood. No one asked what she was doing. No one stopped her when she walked away. Someone stepped over her crate and moved it gently with a boot, muttering about logistics, leaving trash in the way. The bench was cleaned without notice. A new tray was set. Another shooter began preparing rounds under the same canopy. Evelyn was already past the tents by then, her crate tucked under one arm, her coat catching flecks of sun as she moved without hurry. At the final checkpoint, the guard didn't check her badge. He waved her through with a quick nod, more focused on the next vehicle in line. She nodded once, folded the badge in half, and slipped it into her pocket. Behind her, the field echoed with the same voices that had been there all morning. Names called, results logged, debriefs whispered over comms. But nothing from her lane. No flags, no follow-up. Just a perfect shot, unrecorded, pressed between silence and dust. Section 4. Why she said nothing. There was a time when Evelyn believed the work mattered more than the people in charge of it. She believed in specs that held under pressure and test groups that told the truth. She believed in teams that pushed for precision, not praise. She had joined the ballistic division straight out of grad school. At first, it was everything she had hoped. Long nights spent solving structural anomalies, testing heat thresholds, and drawing curve maps by hand until the ink bled through the page. She didn't mind the silence of the labs or the hum of equipment. It made sense to her, the rhythm of careful work done without shortcuts. But the longer she stayed, the more the silence shifted. It stopped feeling like focus and started feeling like fear. There was a trial 6 years before the test range, a case study where a new vendor's round failed repeatedly under thermal drift. Evelyn flagged it in the reports. She brought it to her supervisor. He told her it had already been cleared. She didn't understand. The data was wrong. The failure rate exceeded operational margin. She showed the charts. She circled the anomaly. He didn't argue. He just nodded and asked her to file a revised version for presentation. That night she rewrote the report but kept the original. She brought both to the next meeting. They didn't use either. A week later she was removed from the team. No explanation. Just a reassignment to an archive review project with no active fieldwork. It was the first time she realized the shot didn't have to be perfect. It just had to be profitable. After that, she withdrew from the system quietly but completely. She left when her clearance expired and didn't renew. In the years that followed, she didn't try to expose anyone. She didn't go on record or reach out to the press. It wasn't about punishment. It was about peace. She began working alone slowly with the same care she had always carried. The designs weren't flashy. They weren't meant to be. Each one was shaped around consistency, not speed. Around survival, not spectacle. Evelyn never wanted credit. She never sought out contracts or funding. She built for herself. Each prototype was an answer to a question no one had asked yet. She liked it that way. When she saw the open submission notice, it didn't feel like a second chance. It felt like a clean final page. A way to put something real back on the board even if no one noticed. She didn't need a podium. She didn't need applause. She just needed to know it worked. That's why she said nothing when they laughed. That's why she didn't flinch when they misread her name or tossed her casing into the scrap bin. It wasn't about proving them wrong. It was about proving herself right. When she walked away from the range, she didn't look back. She didn't check the data or scan the feeds or ask for a summary report. She had seen the shot. She had felt it through the barrel clean and centered. It didn't matter if they saw it. She had. And for her, that was enough. Section 5. Plot twist. When the system realized too late. Subpart 1. The red flag. By midnight, the test range had gone quiet. Most of the contractors had packed up and the tents stood still in the dark. Inside the control hub, a handful of analysts worked through final uploads, stacking results into composite sheets for procurement review. Then, something blinked red across 3 monitors at once. A thermal grouping from midday didn't match the rest. 0 drift. No heat flare. The overlay showed a clean arc tighter than anything on record that day. They ran it again. Same result. A senior analyst leaned closer, thinking it might be a calibration error. But the metadata flagged a problem. The sample wasn't tagged to any vendor. No serial, no signature, no company name. The record said, manual submission. It had been auto-categorized as filler, the kind of entry that usually got purged before final analysis. Somehow, this one stayed. Someone checked the timecode. It matched a silent lane. Lane 12. The visual feed had cut out early, but there was still a fragment, just a few seconds of footage. The video loaded without audio. A single figure stood at the bench, steady behind an unmarked rifle. Her coat sleeves were rolled and her crate sat open beside her. The bolt clicked forward. She fired once. Then the screen went black. The analysts stared. One of them zoomed in on the casing as it ejected. The image caught the light just enough. 2 letters etched faintly into the brass. EF. No one in the room recognized the initials, but they didn't have to. The signature was in the shot, in the line that hadn't moved, in the round that shouldn't have grouped like that without stabilization. They checked the system again. The data was real. The software had flagged it because nothing else matched it, not even the test samples from the top-tier vendors. Someone leaned back in their chair and asked the question out loud. Who fired this? Another analyst opened the vendor entry log. No logo, no bio, just a folded scan marked independent. Silence hung in the room. A second playback ran, slower this time. The muzzle flash, the casing spin, the stillness of the shooter, then black again. A younger tech pointed to the timestamp. He had seen her. She came in alone, wore boots with dust on the soles. They didn't even assign her a tech. The room stayed quiet a moment longer. Then someone stood and said it flat. Find the casing. Find the graph. Find her. Subpart 2: Who fired it? The morning after the red flag, the control center shifted from routine to alert. No announcement was made, but orders moved fast and quiet. A team combed the site for the casing, for the taped graph, for anything left behind at lane 12. They found the graph still pressed beneath the bench lip, smudged but intact. The casing was recovered from the scrap bin and sealed in a plastic sleeve with the initials now clearly visible. Procurement officers reviewed the footage again. Still no audio, but this time they watched differently. One commander leaned in, eyes fixed on the way she handled the bolt, the exact angle of her stance. They located her by early afternoon. She had left no forwarding number, no contact email, just a mailing address on her submission written in pen. A request was sent. She returned the next day. No one clapped when she walked in. No one filmed. There were no marketing teams, no social feeds, only officers waiting at the gate, arms folded, faces unreadable. They didn't ask questions. They opened the lane. Her original bench had been cleared and reset. The graph she left was now laminated and mounted beside the tray. She placed her crate on the surface, opened it, lifted the same 3 rounds one by one and arranged them without a word. A technician stepped back. Observers gathered under the canopy but kept their distance. A colonel stood just behind the range line. A procurement analyst leaned forward with a notepad but didn't speak. Evelyn picked up the same rifle. She adjusted nothing. No optics, no support modules, no guided assistance. Just breath and metal. She fired the first round, clean. The screen blinked, perfect group. She fired again. The second landed directly beside the first. The final round echoed longer than it needed to. The barrel cooled in silence. No one moved. A tech reviewed the grouping overlay. Thermal drift registered below threshold. Deviation was unmeasurable. The analyst nodded once, then looked up. The colonel stepped forward, asked nothing, just met her eyes and waited. Evelyn returned the rifle to the bench. She didn't speak. She didn't stay. She closed the crate, lifted it slowly, and walked past them all. This time no one looked away. And no one forgot where they'd seen her. A week after the second test, Evelyn received 3 offers. One from a defense firm known for precision optics, another from a tactical group trying to rebrand, and the last from a government contractor with a standing research grant. She didn't respond to any of them. A liaison tracked her down on the edge of the range. He spoke carefully, offered co-development, mentioned equity. She listened without interrupting, then closed her crate and walked past him without a word. She didn't ask for credit. She didn't submit a follow-up. Her name never appeared in the internal reports, only her initials on a printed graph and the curve of a perfect shot logged in a private server. The casing was framed by one of the analysts. It hung near the terminal where the red flag first appeared. Some said it was superstition. Others said it was habit. Either way, no one moved it. The laminated graph she left behind became a reference point. Engineers began taping copies beside their drafting stations. Ballistics teams passed around grainy stills of it as if they were clues to a forgotten formula. In certain training circles, a new term surfaced. They called it the Evelyn check. One unassisted shot, no overlay, no support rig, just a barrel, a round, and a target. If it grouped tight, the build moved forward. If not, it didn't. No one made an announcement. It wasn't policy. It didn't need to be. It was quieter than that. A way of remembering what mattered when no one was watching. She had walked away from it all. No plaque, no interview. She had said everything she needed to without raising her voice. And somehow that silence became the loudest mark on the board. It started with a photo. A still frame pulled from a test range feed, low resolution and slightly out of focus. 3 silver rounds sat arranged in a triangle with a strip of yellowed tape holding a folded graph beneath the bench. Someone posted it late at night on a forum few people read. No caption. Just a note that read, Sample 19. By morning, the image had made its way into private group chats and engineering threads. A retired marksman recognized the casing curve, said he hadn't seen that shape since the deep vault trials. Another user zoomed in on the initials etched at the base. EF. Speculation followed. Some claimed it was a shelved prototype from an old program. Others believed it was a hoax. But then someone uploaded the thermal trace. It matched no known system, no bloom, no drift, just a single path with clean compression. The post spread. Quietly at first, then with a kind of reverence, not as a breakthrough, not as a product, but as a reminder that precision still mattered even if no one was watching. Pilots began taping printed versions of the graph inside their cockpit lockers. Ballistics engineers pinned it to the sides of whiteboards in classrooms. Recruits folded it into notebooks with soft covers and kept it in the backs of drawers. No one asked who she was. Most didn't care. It wasn't about Evelyn. It was about what she had left behind. The initials EF started showing up in strange places, scratched into casings, inked along the margins of hand-drawn spec sheets, etched onto tools passed between mentors and trainees. There were no interviews, no podcasts, no statements, just a pattern, just a story too quiet to ignore. Some said she had left the country. Others believed she still lived outside Santa Fe walking the canyon lines with a pencil and graph paper in her coat pocket. But no one really knew. What they knew was the mark, the shape of a trajectory so clean it could only have come from care, not funding, from a person, not a brand. In one lab, an intern kept the image as his desktop background, not because it was beautiful, because it was true. Evelyn didn't return to any ranges after that. No submissions, no crates, no notes. But in cities and schools and testing fields across the country, her graph kept showing up. Folded, laminated, studied, shared. And somewhere far from those places, on a quiet road cut into dry earth, a pair of boots left shallow prints in the dust. No one followed them. No one filmed. She didn't want to be seen, but she had already been understood.